you will, please turn to the book of Malachi. We're going to be in Malachi today. And if you don't know where Malachi is, just find Matthew and turn one book to the left. So, just a little overview of the book of Matthew for you, where this is at in the Bible. Malachi was written around 450 to 400 BC, so quite a long time ago. But a key thing we need to remember is, yes, a lot of people know that Malachi was the last book of the Old Testament, but I want you to kind of look at Malachi from a Jewish person's perspective. They had had direct revelation from God in some form or fashion through prophets, priests, kings, for basically the last 1,000 years. And to them at this time, this was just another book to them. I mean, if you continuously get revelation from God through some dreams, direct revelation, you kind of get content with it. You kind of get normalized to it. You're like, oh, there's another revelation from God. Or, oh, he just pulled up to the left side in my horse and buggy or donkey. So you kind of get numb to it. And what the Jewish people didn't realize was this was going to be the last direct revelation they had from God for 400 years before the book of Matthew came about and Jesus Christ and John the Baptist came on the scene. So one thing I want you to kind of realize here is, do you appreciate something when it's gone? I mean, we obviously appreciate electricity and water when it's gone. I mean, we raise the roof when we lose electricity for 5 minutes, and we're like, you better not be charging me for that 5 minutes I didn't have electricity. Like, oh, we're blowing up the electric company's phones with that one. But just think about it. The Jewish people had no idea they were going to have this silence for 400 years. So that's 4 generations. Could you go 4 generations without getting direct revelation from God when you had it for the 1,000 years previously? So just keep that in mind as we're reading through Malachi, is that you really need to hold on to something. If you value it as precious, you need to hold on to it and be appreciative of it. That way, if you don't have it, and I mean, we're lucky here in America that we have the freedom to buy Bibles any day of the week we want, but there are many countries where you don't have that freedom. They may have just one verse on the side of a wall. So just remember to appreciate what you have, and you never know when you may not have access to it again. But here in the book of Malachi, kind of the theme here, and the theme that is going to be in our teaching today, is quality control. God is going to be basically going through a list of roughly 7 things that the Jewish people thought they were doing correctly for worship of God. And God is going to act as the inspector here and be like, okay, you say you're doing all right? Well, let me be the inspector. Let me tell you how you're doing. And that's kind of where this first verse that we have comes into play. You may not be able to read that up there, but I'll read this aloud to you. It's Malachi 1, 7, and 8. You offer defiled food on my altar, but say, in what way have we defiled you? By saying, the table of the Lord is contemptible. And when you offer the blind as a sacrifice, is it not evil? And when you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it then to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Would he accept you favorably? Says the Lord of hosts. So the rough overview of the entire book of Malachi is you're doing worship. The Jewish people were worshiping God, but they weren't doing it in the right way. And to God, it was contemptible. And here, God is comparing it to, would you offer a half-eaten meal to your governor and say, here's a free meal. Oh, yeah, I ate the ice cream and all the good bits. You can have just the seeds and a little bit of morsel right over here. No, your governor's not going to like you and probably raise your taxes, too, if you do that. But that's the same way God was talking with these Jewish people, was that they were taking all the aspects of their worship of God, and they were going halfway, perverting it, and we're going to see here in a moment, we're going to go through 7 things of seeing how this was contemptible to God, and And if you want to know how does this relate to us, as we go through this teaching, I want you to think of yourselves as a person doing your job, whatever your job is, or if you've retired, whatever your job was, and think of, okay, there's your boss, there's your inspector right behind you, watching you do a task at your job or whatever. And God is grading you like, okay, did you do that right? Did you do that right? No. Okay, I need another red pen here. That's kind of the theme of the book of Malachi. So as we go through this, think of yourself in that role of you're being inspected, and God is inspecting you. And do you know what the grade's going to be like, or you're going to be surprised, or you're not even going to care what your grade is? So thankfully, the Bible has many examples, and the first thing that Malachi hits here is the first attempt at doing this task is an unsuitable sacrifice. And we're right here in Malachi 2:8, and he goes, "But you have departed from the way. You have caused many to stumble at the law. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says the Lord of hosts." So God here is saying that, because this Malachi is kind of, it is, directed forcefully at the priests of that time, the Jewish priests. They were essentially also teachers to the Jewish people of what God's law was. And how this relates to us today is that with Jesus Christ coming in the new covenant, we Christians have been given many of the responsibilities of priests. We are required to teach people, maybe not as a pastor, but person to person. We teach people about God. We tell them about God. But here, as an example, the priests in the Old Testament, they were perverting the law. And you ask, how were they perverting it? Well, here's a good old example for you. Well, the start is Cain's sacrifice. And many of you have heard about the story of Cain. It's in Genesis. Genesis 4, I believe. And basically the story is Cain and his brother, they decided to give the Lord a sacrifice. Cain brought the fruit of the field, and Abel brought a lamb. And when they offered the sacrifice, God accepted Abel's sacrifice, but he refused Cain's. He would not have it at all. And how many times when we do something and then we're told, hey, it's wrong, instead of correcting it, do we just get angry? We're like, I put in all this effort. This should be perfect. Why are you grading me? You have no right to grade me. And then instead of fixing it, we take it out on somebody else. We don't fix it, and in this situation, Cain, he takes out his anger on his brother Abel and kills him. The first murder recorded in human history. So the people of Malachi's time, the priests, they were not following the proper sacrifices, and Cain is a result of not following a sacrifice or doing it incorrectly, and you hate God so much that you don't even care to fix it. So that's our first attempt. Now your inspector's like, nope, did that wrong, red check mark, try again. So, all right, we're on attempt number 2 here. Flawed teaching. All right, so now we're into Malachi 2:11. Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has committed. Oh, I'm sorry. Got a little ahead of myself. But you have departed from the way. I'm sorry, Malachi 2:8. But you have departed from the way. You have caused many to stumble at the law. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says the Lord of hosts. So here, what he's really focusing on here in Malachi, and here's an example of, is the sacrificial system they had there in place. And the example we have in the Bible is Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Why they decided to have those names, I have no idea, but they're stranger names in the Bible. But Hophni and Phinehas, they were priests, and they were serving in the temple, so everybody saw them. And unfortunately, they were committing 2 major sins as priests, and they were committing them publicly. The first one, as you can see here, is As you know, the sacrifices had to be brought in a certain way, sacrificed at proper time. But Hophni and Phinehas, they were like, we want the porterhouse steaks first. So they were going out before the sacrifices were even being put on the altar, and they were saying, give me a cut of meat. And they wouldn't let the people sacrifice until they had gotten their portion of what they wanted. And they were taking what God had specifically said wasn't for them. And then their second sin was they were going out and fornicating with the ladies at the city gate. And worst thing of it all was everybody knew it. And it was coming to Eli's ears. And there was kind of two sins involved here. The sons were continually doing this, and Eli wasn't. He was basically giving a slap on the wrist. He was saying, don't do that. But then he wasn't correcting them. And you know, as parents, I'm sure you know, if you don't have some force behind a command, your children will just keep doing whatever you tell them not to do. And this is the same way that was happening with Hophni and Phinehas. So, but just as these two, they were corrupting the sacrifices, but as you can see, it was public. The people saw this. And here in Malachi, how can you teach somebody God's law if you're not following it? How can we tell people of our day today, I want you to follow God's law. I want you to abstain from these things. But you're doing it, and everybody else knows it. Nobody's going to listen to you. They're like, why should I add those extra rules when I already do that already? And here's an example I just heard recently that really hit home. Was a gentleman was telling me that, and here's something to get your minds going. Take a guess, I want everybody to think in your mind, what are the three professions of people that if an airplane flight is delayed, what are the three professions that would get the most annoyed that your flight is delayed? I'll give you a few seconds to think. What are the three professions that get most annoyed that a flight is delayed? All right, by show of hands, did anybody pick doctors? Okay, that was number 3. Number 2, did anybody pick lawyers? All right, a couple more. Now this is the one that hurt. Number 1, by far, ministers. And I was like, ouch. And just as we are living examples, everyone, we're to be mirrors, we're to reflect the light of Christ. And if you're in a plane and you are getting angry simply because the plane has been delayed, you've got between 90 to 400 people all looking at you. And be like, why is he getting annoyed? Why should I get annoyed? And you're totally destroying your testimony. So, as the old saying goes, somebody is always watching you. Not only God, but the people around you. So if you want to teach God's law, if you want people to love God and to be brought into his family, you've got to live it. Otherwise, nobody is going to listen to us. And third attempt we've got here. Got 2 down, a few more to go. And this one, everybody knows this one, an incompatible partner. And what Malachi was referring to here is in 2:11. Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has been committed in in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the Lord's holy institution, which he loves. He has married the daughter of a foreign god. I know we've all heard this a lot, and obviously, one reason why Malachi is teaching it again is because we're not listening the first time. Unfortunately, from my previous experience in the military, they were always telling us, don't drink and drive. And why? Because people were still drinking and driving. Well, it's the same way here with finding the right spouse for your marriage. I can't hit this hard enough, and God can't either. Find the right man or woman for your life. Wait. And the example here is good old Solomon. Solomon, 700 wives and 300 concubines. I don't know how he did it, but apparently he did. But I know a lot of times we like to joke about Solomon and his wealth and everything, but kind of one thing I wanted to focus on here was, think about it, 700 wives, 300 concubines, you're committing the same sin 1,000 times. How many times do we have to commit the same sin over and over before we get the hint? Is this wrong? Should I stop doing this? Solomon had all the wisdom in the world, all the wealth, and this is what happened. So just remember, God was long-suffering. Solomon had a peaceful ending, but you remember his son, the kingdom was split. And even if you look back in Kings, you'll find they were even invaded, the very next king. So even if you don't see it, your children may suffer the results of your sin. Not because they're responsible, but simply because the effects may be delayed by God's timing. You don't sin in a vacuum. So just look at Solomon. Even though you have everything, how much do you have to be told, stop doing something? And sometimes people still don't get it. And then our fourth attempt here. Looking to fail. Malachi 2:17. I'm sorry, 2:14 as well. Yet you say, for what reason? Because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously, yet she is your companion and your wife by covenant. Now, I'm kind of rag on us guys for a minute, and I'm sure you ladies will love it. But remember, God views man as head of the home. We are responsible for the home. So when we marry, we are setting up that home. We are now assuming that responsibility of leading a home. And what was happening here in the book of Malachi was the men, they were using divorce as an excuse to get out of marriage for whatever reason that they want. I'm sure nowadays we still have that same problem. But kind of what I want to focus on is something that a lot of us guys deal with today is, and what they were looking at then was, were you going into marriage saying, till I find someone better? Or were they like getting married and then we get this feeling when we buy something and 6 months later we're like, we have buyer's remorse? Like, there's something better over there. Ooh, she's richer. Oh my. Guys were very visual. And this is what was happening back then, and it still happens today. And the other thing I want to focus on this idea is treacherously, looking to betray. When you're in a relationship or in your marriage, for both parties, are you looking for an excuse to get out of it? Are you actively looking? You should not even be looking. You've made a promise to that spouse. Hey, I'm going to marry you for the rest of my life. But this is what was happening, and you see it a lot of times in marriages today. They're like, sorry, he or she's richer, she's prettier, whatever. The excuse du jour. And why are you looking to fail? That's your first problem. If you're looking to fail, you shouldn't enter into that relationship at all. So check yourselves. Are you looking to get in a long-term relationship for life, or are you just looking to satisfy your basic instincts? It's happened in the past, happening today, and God's going to keep on harping it till He comes back. So watch yourself. Fifth attempt. Fool the inspector. Now this is always a good one. So here we are in Malachi 2:17. You have wearied the Lord with your words. Yet you say, in what way have we wearied him? And that you say, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or where is the God of justice? And kind of the idea here is, back in Malachi's time, The people here were like, why should we follow God? Justice isn't being executed. Or he's delaying, or the evil are prospering. Why should we do this? And a lot of times people ask that question, why should I follow God when it's so bad in the world? Why is he delaying? Why is he letting all this bad stuff happen? Well, here's an example of how God works. Back in Judges, Abimelech, he was a judge right after Gideon. He was actually one of Gideon's sons. But you know how he got the position of being a judge? He murdered all his siblings. 70 of them, actually. And he became a judge. He missed one, but he became the judge, and he was a judge for 3 years. Are we willing to wait 3 years for God's justice? Or are we going to abandon him and say, God doesn't judge anymore? But guess what? Abimelech met his end when you ladies got in your shot put format and chucked a stone and it knocked him right on the head. So God's justice does come around. And are we willing to wait? Or are we going to abandon God and initiate our own justice? God's justice is always perfect. And we should not abandon him simply because it's not happening on our timetable. All right, we tried 5 attempts, now we're up to 6. Now we think we're smarter than the boss. This one always works. And here we are in Malachi 3:9. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Now I'm going to touch on a subject that I know everybody loves, tithes and offerings. And what was happening here in Malachi was, back under the old Jewish law, they had specific tithes they were required to bring to the temple every year. And they weren't fulfilling them. They just weren't. And the question you have to ask yourself today, and how does this apply, is, do you trust God with the offerings you give him? Or do you consider giving to the Lord's church a loss or wasted money? That's what the Israelites were doing. They did not trust God. And even if you read on in the section of Malachi, you'll find that God says, test me. Bring what I tell you and see what happens. If we're bringing what is right, God will bless it. It may not be the way we think, but if we're bringing what God has commanded us to bring or in our hearts, God will bless it. But when we don't trust him with what we give God, whatever it's time, money, whatever, if we don't trust him, then do you really think us humans know how to spend money well? I mean, there's people out there spending tens of thousands of dollars for a white sheet of paper and calling it art. Or a rotten banana and call it art, $16,000. So, trust God with your offerings. That's all I'm saying. And let God do the rest. And then, of course, the example of not trusting God is Ananias and Sapphira over in the book of Acts. They were just doing what everybody else was doing. They sold a piece of land, got the proceeds, brought it to God's house. Just one problem. They kept some of it back. And they paid for it with their lives. Now, I'm not saying if you don't bring your offering today or whenever that God's going to strike you dead. No. But I'm just saying, if you give wholeheartedly. Give with the intent of, this is investment in God's house. God's going to use this better than I can. So, just trust God with your offerings, and he'll do the rest. All right, 7th attempt. 7th attempt. I should be paid for the worship of God. Here in Malachi 3:14, they were saying, you have said, it is useless to serve God. What profit is it that we have kept his ordinance, and that we have walked as mourners before the Lord of hosts? Now this one, we have a very, you've heard of it said, health and wealth religion. And they were having it back then too. They were saying, where's my profit? If I'm serving God, where's the blessing? I should see my herds multiplying, my fields growing. I should be having money falling from heaven. Where is it? And if it isn't, then what's the purpose of serving God if I don't get blessed financially, physically, whatever? That's what they were saying back then, and I know you've heard a lot of that today as well, like, we'll only serve this religion because it makes us richer. So, and another very good example of this is for you parents. How often do you have to throw out a little candy to make your kid do something? And then they come back and they won't do it again unless you throw out another piece of candy. Are we serving God just to get that piece of candy? Are we serving God only because we want direct, immediate rewards? Or are we serving Him because that's what's required of us? We're required to serve God if we are Christians. And if we're serving Him just to get that candy, then one, we'll have very bad toothache after a while. But we're going to miss all the blessings God wants us to have. I can't tell you how many times serving the Lord, not expecting anything in return, and then I get a blessing out of left field. I'm like, where did that come from? So, just as you are serving God, make sure you're serving Him for the right reasons. Don't go after what Satan throws out, like, do it just for that immediate gratification. No, it won't work. You need to be serving God for the right reasons. And one example of this is a little lesser-known story of Simon the magician in Acts. Simon himself was initially a magician, and when he saw the miracles of the apostles and disciples, he wanted that too. He was actually even baptized, but he was joining for the wrong reasons. Later, he asked the disciples, here's some money. Give me the Holy Spirit. And the apostles rebuked him, saying, we hope your money rots away. You don't have a part of us. Are we trying to do that today as well? We see another Christian prospering, and we want that, but we want it for the wrong reasons. So don't go worshiping God for the wrong reasons, because in the end, you're not going to like the results. So, oh well. It's always good to have a short one of these days. But where does this all come to? Like I said, we're sitting here, we're being inspected by God. And here in Malachi 3:2, this is the result. But who can endure the day of His coming? And who can stand when He appears? For He is like a refiner's fire and like a launderer's soap. When all these attempts at worship go in front of God or go in front of the inspector, He's going to bring out His red pen and is like, nope, nope, nope. And it's going to be burned away. And if you're a Christian today, I ask you, when you get up there, we're sitting in front of that bema seat judgment. When our works are tested by God's fire, are we going to be surprised at how much is there? Or going to be disappointed because we see one little gemstone sitting down there, because that's all that we put into, that's all it's really worth. That's what God will do with our worship, whatever form it takes. If we say we're worshiping God, then one day He will refine it. And it's going to be, are we going to be surprised in joy or surprised and sad? And then finally, I want to ask you these questions as you head out today. And as you're having lunch, maybe Thanksgiving leftovers, if there's any left. Who is your spiritual inspector? Everybody has one. We start out with the default inspector. And I can tell you, He's the worst kind of inspector there is. Why? Because he will approve of everything you do. Everything. Except one thing. Changing inspectors. And when you do, he'll still be back there saying, I'll give you a free inspection. I'll pass you. But guess what? When the other inspector, Jesus Christ, comes around, he's going to be like, who said this was good? You're going to put like, Jesus is going to be, I'm your inspector. Why are you looking over at him? So, first question, who's your inspector? The second is, do you want an inspector who tells you what's wrong or approves of everything you do? Do you want to know what's wrong in your life? Do you want to know how to correct it? Because if you want to, Jesus' arms are open. He's asking you, hey, I'll be your inspector. I'll show you how to build the right house. I'll show you how to correct your life where it's worth something instead of it feels like just being dissipated and there's nothing but to eat, drink, and be merry. Do you want an inspector with purpose or an inspector who just wants to see you go where he's going at the end? Because that's what Satan wants. Third is, if Jesus is your inspector, are you proud to be inspected or do you hide when he comes around? Do you want Jesus, are you anxious for every time Jesus comes around? He's like, hey, let me look at your life. And you're like, sure, go ahead. You're like, no, please don't come near me. Please, go away, go away. I mean, in my line of work, it was even in human terms when we heard over the radio, hey, QA is on the line. Everybody hide, shut down. Don't do anything. Wait till they go away. Wait till they go away. Okay, go back to work. Or do we like, oh, they're coming. Oh, I know this is good. Bring them over here. Yeah, inspect everything. What do you like in your spiritual life? Are you proud to be inspected, or do you hide? And lastly, if Jesus is your inspector, are you correcting what he tells you? I mean, it's great to have an inspector, but does he just sit on there in the shelf where he's like, hey, stay in the office, don't come out here, I got this? Or are you actually asking, hey, every day when you're in his word, when you're praying, you say, Lord, please show me what I need to change. What do I need to fix? And then once he tells you, he's like, okay, you need to fix this, turn this over the other way. Or you're like, oh, yeah, same thing yesterday. Don't care. Are you correcting what he tells you? So, as we close this evening, early morning. As we close today, just be asking yourself these questions. And be asking, do I want to be inspected? Am I proud to be inspected? Or do I just want to have this inspector that gives me an easy pass, doesn't charge anything, but he'll come for the bill at the end of our life? So, pray with me if you will.